So I got out of watching Black Widow just a little bit ago, and for the most part, it was a fairly decent movie. The direction that it took, a lot of the character interactions, a good chunk of the action scenes, all very well done and pretty spot on. A lot of things that I thought they had to get right, they got right. But at the same time, a lot of things that I felt that they were going to get wrong, they still got wrong. And that's kind of the back and forth on this movie that I really have. With every trailer that came out, I could tell where my expectations were going, and I kind of started to adjust my expectations as it went along, because I knew that it wasn't going to deliver on everything that I initially thought it was going to deliver. So the moment I felt that feeling, I was kind of able to enjoy it for what it was. But let's go over the plot as a whole. The movie starts off with Natasha's background, and that is one of a Russian spy in America. And this is when she was fairly young, as she's in a fake family with Red Guardian Alexei Shostakov, played by David Harbour, as the father, Melina Vostokov, played by Rachel Weisz, who is the Iron Maiden, a character who was always in the shadow of the Black Widow in the comics, and resented her for that. Black Widow herself, Natasha, played by Scarlett Johansson, is the eldest daughter, still fairly young, and Yelena Belova, another Black Widow who ran the Red Room process and was also always in the shadow of Black Widow, played by Florence Pugh. And honestly, the standout performance in this movie, aside from Scarlett Johansson, really is Florence Pugh. She is spot on as a character. But in this fake family, they've gone to America to get this intel. They've been living there for about 3 years, with the only one of the family who, because she was too young, actually thinks their family is just a normal family, being Yelena Belova, because she's just so young. But when it comes time to cut and run, they have to escape away from America, arrive at this Russian base in the Bahamas. During the process of their escape, Melina is shot and taken away. It becomes also very obvious that Alexei was just not happy being in such a position, because he's actually a super soldier, and he just wasn't too happy with just being in such a normal setting. He enjoyed it to some degree, but it was just too standard for him. Meanwhile, the girl, specifically Natasha, who had actually been in the Red Room project before, because she was even younger than Yelena before Yelena got brought in. Yelena was just a standard little girl, but it was after this mission that she was brought into the Red Room project. So Natasha already had previous training and was just shunted right back into it, while Yelena is simply put into it for the first time, but she already had at least a little bit of training. And I love the scene where Natasha's desperately trying to keep them away from Yelena so that she won't be put through the same kind of hell Natasha was. It's a very touching moment, and well played by the very young actress. Yeah, Ever Anderson, she really sold that moment. But ultimately they're taken away, they're put through the Red Room process. We end up knowing what happens to Natasha. Eventually Clint Barton comes after her in Budapest. We actually get a little bit of that backstory in this movie. It was Budapest that Clint was actually sent to go after Natasha, and that was where she had that turn where he made the call to not kill her, but to actually try to bring her in. And it was eventually through that she became a SHIELD agent and then an Avenger. Unfortunately, Yelena's story isn't as happy, as she actually ended up in a worse version of the Red Room than Natasha, where Natasha there was a lot of conditioning and subjugation and things of that nature. For Yelena, it was a complete mental takeover. They pretty much rewrote Yelena's generation of Black Widows, rewrote their minds entirely. And it was only because one Black Widow managed to get away and get this kind of specialized powder that would release any Black Widow from that mental conditioning. As Yelena's going after her, she manages to spray Yelena right before Yelena ends up killing her. And before she dies in Yelena's arms, tells Yelena to free the rest of the Black Widows. So Yelena goes on the run from the Red Room and had apparently sent most of the, what I'll call anti-Black Widow formula to Natasha. Unfortunately for Yelena, Natasha doesn't receive it until she's already on the run after the events of Civil War, with Thaddeus Ross coming after her hard. As thanks to a contact of hers called Rick Mason, who is actually from the comics, he tends to be someone called the Agent, who deals in a lot of non-lethal kind of stuff. If you need something, he's got your back. And, this was during the time where she was on the run, trying to duck, dodge, and weave through Ross's goons and all that good stuff. She gets to a safe house. Rick brings her all of her mail from Budapest and all that, one of which being a container with all of the vials of the anti-Black Widow serum. Unfortunately, Natasha doesn't know this, and that's when all of a sudden in comes Taskmaster, who was sent to hunt down all of the vials as well as hunt down Yelena, and now he's come after Natasha. And honestly, Taskmaster has some great, fantastic action scenes, and I love the fact that they constantly keep the character under a mask. That's one thing that I always have a problem with a lot of these movies, is that the character is constantly taking the mask off in order to show off the actor, because of course you want to show off the actor, but it's just like, at the same time, it's that body acting and all that it tends to be the best part of a character. And the initial fight between Taskmaster and Black Widow, pulse pounding, honestly, seriously. And it's only by a hair's breadth that Natasha manages to get away with the anti-Black Widow formula, after realizing what it actually is. Well, not so much what it is, but who it's from. So she heads to Budapest, to her old hideout where she had the initial fight with Hawkeye, and she runs into Yelena. And after an initial skirmish, it's revealed that Natasha had actually originally tried to bring down the Red Room by taking out the person in charge of it, General Dreykov. Something that Natasha isn't too proud of, because it involved taking out Dreykov as well as his daughter Antonia. Which really took me off guard, because it's just like, oh no, you just had Natasha be an accessory to child murder. That's pretty hardcore. But Yelena burst Natasha's bubble and say that, no, you didn't take down the Red Room. It's still up and running. And Dreykov, you maybe took out his daughter, but he's still out there. Much to Natasha's surprise, and that's when they get set upon by all these Black Widows. Which is funny, because I actually have been following one of the people who play one of the Black Widows on Instagram for years now, and she was so excited when it was coming out, but it was such a disappointment because it ended up being constantly pushed back. And while she doesn't have that much of a screen presence in the movie, it was still interesting to just be like, oh, that's her. That's so nice to see. Really glad she got that kind of attention. That's the Samurider on Instagram. She is very skilled when it comes to weapons trading. Definitely check her out. If you ever look at the Black Widow poster, she's the one with the fro on the poster. Very cool. But there's this awesome chase scene with the Black Widows going after Yelena and Natasha. And there's this really intense moment where one of the Black Widows take a tumble that Natasha tries to save her from, but the Widow fights until the end and she gets very brutally injured. Natasha goes to try to help her, but then Dreykov controls her to self-terminate, and like she blasts herself in the face with one of the widow gauntlets, and it's just such an uncomfortable scene that they linger on for so long, and it just really stuck out to me because it's just like, man, that was brutal. Something else that I want to make note of, they say shit in this movie a lot, and I don't mean like they talk a lot, they say the word shit a lot. It is their curse word du jour, especially with Yelena. She has a potty mouth, but she just has a mouth on her in general, and I really do love it. As they continue the chase scene, Taskmaster comes at them in this armored vehicle, and he just comes out of nowhere. I love the way it comes in, because it's like the truck in Sonic Adventure 2 that just starts chasing after him like a bat out of hell. It is the most intense shit ever, and they just barely managed to get away from Taskmaster. I love the initial appearance of Taskmaster. It is so cool, but ultimately they feel like they have to go and get into the Red Room, so they end up going after Alexei, who has apparently been imprisoned in this Russian prison up in the mountains. Cool action scene with him. Unfortunately, the part that David Harbour plays is basically just comedic relief. There's nothing serious at all about his character. It's all played for the jokes. Basically just this washed up has-been soldier, with his only notable feature just being that he is a super soldier. But he kind of feels like the super soldier that Steve Rogers would have been back in the day had he never gone on that mission to save the Howling Commandos. So that's a bit of an interesting parallel. But Yelena and Natasha save him. He's kind of a jerk for the most part because all he can really do is talk about himself. But it's revealed that while he was Dreykov's kind of almost right-hand man, Dreykov betrayed him and just threw him right in prison to get rid of him. Actually kind of sad. But he reveals that the only person who would have information on the Red Room would be their surrogate mother, Milena, who the girls thought was dead. So they end up heading to Milena's farm. There's this moment that you've seen, honestly, in all the trailers where they meet up, they kind of catch up, they eat at the dinner table, have a bit of a moment, but Milena isn't really willing to help because she feels that it is a fool's errand to go after this, and Natasha kind of blows up at both Milena and Alexei, calling Alexei an idiot and Milena a coward, and saying that nothing that they had was real. And Florence Pugh has this wonderful moment where she says that for her, it was real because she was so young, because she was never told that it wasn't real. Because they had to put on all these fake memories and take pictures of Christmas, Thanksgiving, summer vacation, all on a soundstage basically. But as Alexei goes to kind of show some care to Yelena, Natasha and Milena have this great moment where you found out Milena kept an old scrapbook that they had full of all the fake pictures that they had made. As for Natasha, it was the closest thing to something real, to a real past she could have had. And for Natasha, she had always thought that her parents had just willingly given her up. But as it turns out, as she hears from Milena, that her mother actually had gone searching for her, and the Red Room eliminated her because of it. They had tried to pay her off, tried to get rid of her, but she kept digging and digging, and they just felt it best to eliminate her, even if she was no threat. But then it's eventually revealed that Milena had actually contacted the Red Room, and then all the Black Widows and the Red Room come storming in. Milena apparently knocks out Natasha as well as Yelena, and they're all captured and taken to the Red Room, which we find out the reason why nobody could ever find it is because it's basically stationed like right up in the clouds. How that can maintain its altitude is anyone's guess, but I guess it's supposed to be a testament to how much money and influence and power Dreykov has. So apparently Natasha and Alexei are imprisoned. Yelena is strapped down to a table so they can apparently remove her brain in order to find out what it is that allows the anti-Black Widow serum to undo the conditioning while Milena meets up with Dreykov, but he actually catches on to what's going on with Milena, that it isn't actually Milena that he's talking to. Milena and Natasha had actually switched places. So I actually love that subversion, because for the longest time I kept thinking that Milena was going to turn out to be Taskmaster or something, or at least a villain. But for it to turn out that they had actually planned for all of this initially, that it was all a ruse, so that Natasha could get close to Dreykov. But it seemingly starts to backfire, as Milena had tried to go and sabotage the engines to bring down the Red Room. Alexei ends up in a fight against Taskmaster, and Yelena ends up trying to get the anti-Black Widow serum to the Black Widows who are training up in the Red Room. But we have this really kind of wicked moment. Well, at first, as it's starting to happen, I kind of catch on to it. Before Taskmaster had went to go deal with the Red Guardian Alexei, we come to find out that the Taskmaster is actually Dreykov's daughter, Antonia, who was caught in that blast by Natasha. She didn't die, but she was subjected to all these experiments and conditionings and really horrible stuff. Like the worst of the worst you could do to your daughter. I understand if it was to save her life, but it's really messed up that he subjected his daughter to all of this. And Antonia Dreykov, Tony Masters, I get the comparison. But as soon as the reveal hit, I was just kind of like, I'm gonna be real, Taskmaster loses all the badass points at that point. Because even just making Taskmaster this unstoppable, almost Deathstroke-esque enforcer for Dreykov kind of would have been a little bit more preferable than making it that it was, this sad entity that almost needs to be put out of her misery. But Natasha tries to attack Dreykov, apparently a condition that's been placed in a lot of Black Widows back since Milena's time, was that if any of the Black Widows smell Dreykov's pheromones or anything like that, they can't attack him. And I love the way Natasha gets around this by basically having Dreykov slap her silly and then smashing her own face in order to disable her sense of smell, so that she can disable his control of the Red Room and get the information on all the Black Widows across the world, because Dreykov has access to all these women, these orphan girls. And honestly, this movie has a great commentary on how orphans tend to be just overlooked by the system in all these various countries. Honestly, even in terms of America, orphans tend to be treated the most poorly in this country, and that ends up being overlooked in a lot of situations. And you get people like Dreykov who takes advantage of that, even in the real world, taking advantage of the fact that these girls are overlooked and treated as this unwanted thing for the most part. It's a very sad message, and kudos to the movie for really going there, because they show some very uncomfortable imagery. But Dreykov manages to call in the Black Widows to go after Natasha, and we get this scene where Natasha just ends up getting the crap beat out of her by all these Black Widows. Meanwhile, Milena ends up disabling one of the engines by force because she wasn't able to do it manually, and she ends up going back to Alexei, who's getting the crap beat out of him by Taskmaster. They just barely manage to get Taskmaster in one of the cells that they're next to. Meanwhile, Milena manages to grab the anti-Black Widow serum and gets it to Natasha, who's getting the crap beat out of her. And she manages to undo the brainwashing of all the Black Widows in the room. So while Yelena gets all of the Black Widow candidates to safety, well, not candidates, subjects to safety, Natasha gets the information on all the locations of the Black Widows across the world, just barely managing to get out of Dreykov's office as the whole Red Room is coming down. Milena and Alexei barely manage to make it off of the Red Room, and as Dreykov is getting away with his security detail, Yelena actually ends up destroying one of the engines with one of her weapons, getting blown clear off of the Red Room, but it ends up destroying Dreykov's entire plane, and so ending him. Meanwhile, Natasha ends up freeing Taskmaster because she feels that ultimately, while Taskmaster will come for her ass, Antonia isn't in control of anything. So because Antonia is a victim, she wants to get Antonia out of there. We get this pretty cool action scene as Taskmaster is gunning for Natasha with all the debris from the Red Room just falling all off. Honestly, it is way too clean of a collapse of a giant inner orbit station, but honestly, during the course of this movie, Natasha survives like about 3 or was it 4 crashes? I think it was 2 car crashes that were caused because the car exploded because of Taskmaster being thrown from a motorcycle, and a helicopter crash that only happened because they ran out of fuel. Like, there's so many leaps in logic on how Natasha can survive most of this stuff. It's really far out. But during the free fall, Natasha manages to save Yelena. She managed to land safely somehow. That ground came up way faster than I thought it was, because Natasha manages to land safely with Taskmaster. They have a bit of a scuffle until Natasha is able to administer the anti-Widow serum. So Taskmaster is taken out of commission, and honestly, it's kind of a lame end. It's a sweet direction, but it's the whole your evil counterpart thing that Marvel does all the time, all over again. So kind of a letdown there, but you know, Natasha, Yelena, Melina, and Alexei all come together. They're all fine, but in comes Ross, who had been alerted to Natasha's presence. So the rest of the family go on the run. They even have Yelena team up with the other Black Widows in order to find the other widows around the world to undo the conditioning, with Melina synthesizing more of the anti-Widow serum, and Black Widow Natasha goes back on the run, and we later on catch up with her before the events of Infinity War, where she's getting ready to go and break out Falcon and Ant-Man. Well, not Ant-Man, Falcon specifically, but Captain America and his allies, which really makes the movie feel like it really should have taken place before Infinity War. Because while I didn't hate Captain Marvel, this really feels like a lead up into Infinity War, and one I actually would have loved to have seen. But the after credits scene is Yelena basically being at the grave of Natasha. It's after she died at the end of Endgame and all that, and she's met by Julia Louis-Dreyfus's character of Valentina Allegra de Fontaine that we first saw in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. This was actually supposed to be where she was introduced originally, but because Black Widow got delayed because of COVID, this ends up being her second appearance. And honestly speaking, I prefer it that she was introduced in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, because honestly, the build up there does her more justice than the introduction in the Black Widow movie. Like, I'm just saying, her intro there makes her appearance in Black Widow feel a little bit more like, okay, there's something happening here. And it's a little bit more ambiguous in Falcon and the Winter Soldier if she's a bad person, but she's come to Yelena. Apparently, they've been working together for a little bit of time, and Valentina gives Yelena a mission of going after the person who she accuses for the responsibility of the death of Natasha, and that ends up being none other than Clint Barton, which really kind of makes me wonder, will Yelena actually end up killing Clint? Is that the whole basis behind the Hawkeye series? I'm actually more interested in the Hawkeye series, but I already was, because apparently it's taking cues from one of my favorite comic book runs, which is Matt Fraction's Hawkeye. Love Matt Fraction's Hawkeye. It really helped me to love Hawkeye as a character. So if that's the lead-in that this is having, kudos to this movie. But overall, this movie was just pretty good. I would honestly kind of rate it around the same place as Thor, Captain America, the First Avenger, kind of. Yeah, it's pretty good as a whole. Not my all-time favorite movie, but it's just a pretty good movie, and it was pretty enjoyable. It has some pretty good action. But again, I really do feel like this was the movie to have made before Infinity War. Hell, even pushing Infinity War and Endgame back, so hell, you could have included both Captain Marvel and Black Widow beforehand, because honestly, you did Black Widow kind of a disservice with this, because at this point you might as well have just released it on streaming. It really doesn't feel like you would have lost much on it. But hey, that's just my opinion. Tell me yours in the comment section below. Who was your favorite character? Mine, definitely Yelena. Or honestly, the relationship between Yelena and Natasha. It was super fun. Like, that was the selling point of this movie. Natasha and Yelena. Good stuff. Everything else, alright. But definitely felt like a spy movie that I just wish they had done better with the character of Taskmaster, because once you find out the secret, it's kind of like, okay. Only a matter of time before they take this person down. Taskmaster feels a lot less threatening once you get the reveal, and that's really, really sad. And that's really the only thing that pulls this movie down as a whole. But again, tell me your thoughts in the comment section below. What was your favorite? What was your least favorite? Would you recommend this movie? All that good stuff. And if you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the bell for notifications. All that good YouTube stuff. And until next time, I've been Duuz-Diz-Din, and I will see you later. Bye-bye.